Vince McMahon destroyed one of wrestling's greatest myths on purpose, and he did it to build a monster. That's the most brutal, unpopular, and honest way to open this. WrestleMania XXX didn't just crown a winner, it executed a legend. The Undertaker Streak wasn't just a statistic. It was the single piece of WWE mythology that outlived champions, eras, and even logic. By the time the bell rang in New Orleans, that myth had been cashed in, bartered away for the immediate thunder of a Brock Lesnar victory, and the debate over whether it was genius or sacrilege has never stopped. The streak was 21-0. That fact isn't opinion, it's the spine of the argument. Every year fans bought into the ritual. Come to WrestleMania, watch a challenger try, watch the dead man rise. The streak had become WrestleMania's heartbeat. This video is not about replaying the 3 count. You've seen the footage, you felt the silence, you felt the outrage. This is about what almost nobody saw at the time. The calculus, the power play, the medical reality, and the human aftermath that turned a protected legacy into a business decision. Those backstage choices were not random. They were deliberate. They were made by the man who owns the company, and they were informed by a single-minded, brutal logic who used the streak while it still has maximum commercial value to create something the company desperately wanted: an unbeatable, marketable final boss. Some will call that cold, some will call it visionary. Both arguments have ownership of truths. Start with the way the streak grew into something untouchable. The Undertaker walked into WrestleMania and left a different man every single year for more than 2 decades. Wins stacked into myth. Matches against Triple H, Shawn Michaels, and CM Punk weren't just headliners, they were the kind of storytelling that turned the event into tradition. It was built patiently and protected fiercely. That protection made the streak more valuable than titles, and that's what set up the irreversible tension. How do you cash in something that has become priceless without destroying what made it precious? For many fans, the answer was simple: you don't. You let a legend end undefeated and funeralize the myth into invincible memory. For others, Vince included the answer was the opposite. Cash it in, convert that myth into a new asset, and use the shock to elevate a single performer into a legendary threat. The man chosen was Brock Lesnar. Why Lesnar? Because he isn't a story wrestler. He's the physical, cultural proof that Vince believed could absorb the shock and project permanence. Lesnar was an NCAA wrestling champion, a former UFC heavyweight champion, and already a known commodity, scary, legitimate, and dangerous in a way kayfabe usually pretends to be. He had the aura that could turn a single win into a perpetual badge of terror. But this is where the controversy sharpens. Lesnar was already an established attraction. He didn't need the streak to justify his presence. That's precisely why critics say the streak's value was wasted. The rub should have been used to launch someone else who needed it, someone who could have carried momentum for years. Vince's answer, bluntly, was that there were no other names he trusted to carry that weight at that time. He wanted a final boss. He believed the world would take seriously. That rationale is on record, and it's one of the clearest expressions of McMahon's worldview. Moments trump myth. When moments can be monetized, the behind-the-scenes timeline matters, and this is where facts shred comfortable myths. Multiple reporting threads and comments from those involved say the final decision to end the streak with Lesnar was made very late, reportedly the day of the show. The Undertaker himself has said the plan changed at the venue. He arrived thinking he would walk out undefeated and then learned the finish had flipped. That's not lightweight backstage haggling, it's a last-minute command from the top that rewrites a performer's narrative in real time. For fans who view the streak as sacred, that revelation feels like a betrayal. For executives, it felt like seizing a last viable window to convert legacy into future value. This is not rumor. Several reputable outlets reported that the decision was finalized the day of WrestleMania, and Jim Ross and others later corroborated that McMahon made the call late in the process. Then there's the brutal medical reality that complicates every moral judgment. The Undertaker was not merely decades old in career, his body had been through wars. During the match with Lesnar, he suffered a serious concussion, a trauma so significant that he's said to have little memory of the bout and, according to official statements, was taken to the hospital for evaluation afterwards. WWE confirmed he underwent testing and was diagnosed with a severe concussion that required an overnight stay. Later interviews with Mark Calaway himself corroborated that memory gaps exist from that night. That medical fact changes the framing. This was not just mythology being sacrificed for drama. It became a decision executed against the backdrop of an aging performer's fragile health and a real-time injury that may have made finishing the match as planned impossible. How much did Taker's health accelerate the end of the streak? It's impossible to prove fully, but the concussion is an undeniable part of the story. It's at this intersection, business calculation colliding with the human body, that the most explosive arguments emerge. On one side, the streak's mythological power was destroyed in exchange for a short-term rating and star-making event. That crowd in the Superdome went from frenzy to stunned silence in seconds, a silence that echoed the sense of loss felt by millions of fans. The streak had become annual prophecy, and Vince erased a recurring cliffhanger that drove emotional investment and ticket sales year after year. For critics, that was point-blank foolish. The streak, if it had stayed intact, could have ended in a way where everyone won. Taker retires mythically, a younger full-timer gets the rub, and the company preserves both tradition and succession. The decision to give it to Lesnar wasted an opportunity to pass the torch to an heir apparent. On the other side, the Lesnar camp and some analysts point out what the win did accomplish. Once Lesnar walked out with the victory, WWE had a legitimate monster on its hands. The following months showed the intended effect. Lesnar's SummerSlam demolition of John Cena, a match where Lesnar delivered a brutal sequence of German suplexes and a thoroughly dominant performance, reintroduced a sense of danger to WWE's main event scene. That match wasn't a one-night fluke. It was WWE's proof of concept that Lesnar's aura could be leveraged repeatedly to make other moments feel consequential. The company used Lesnar's new final boss status as the pivot for several major storylines and as a counterweight to babyface narratives for years. Some industry voices argue that, detached from sentiment, this was effective booking. The streak ending created a momentum generator they could actually use. But let's not fall into lazy absolutes. The truth sits in the uncomfortable middle. The streak's end did create one of the most talked about moments in sports entertainment history. Newsrooms, mainstream outlets, and even non-wrestling media debated the cultural impact for weeks. The 3-count didn't just trend on wrestling message boards, it made national headlines. That kind of shock value is the kind of currency Vince McMahon traffics in. It gets eyeballs, water cooler conversations, headline ink. Yet the moral cost, the sense that WWE had traded a slow-burning, perennial attraction for a headline and a heel aura, is real. If the goal was to build an undying monster, it worked. If the goal was to properly pass a legacy to the future of the company, the result reads as a missed opportunity on multiple levels. There's a second emotional angle that must be acknowledged: The Undertaker himself. Here is a performer whose identity is wrapped up in the streak. Mark Calaway carried the streak as part of the character's very DNA. To have a decision made about that part of him late, and possibly expedited by an in-ring injury, is more than narrative injustice, it's a profound personal moment. He said he did not want the streak to be broken at that moment, and he has reflected that the rub would have been better placed on a younger, full-time talent who needed it more than a part-time attraction. That sentiment echoes in the locker room grumblings that have persisted for a decade. The streak's power was so great that its disappearance needed to build something lasting, not just shock value. Many inside and outside the company still agree the streak deserved a different end, one orchestrated as a career choice, not as a one-night extract. Let's break down the practical consequences in wrestling terms. If the streak had been preserved and handed later to a groomed successor, consider the long-tail value. Annual match anticipation stays intact, booking can seed a slow burn narrative, and a new star receives a structured elevation. Instead, what unfolded was an immediate atmospheric change that put Lesnar in a unique position but didn't systematically elevate a new generation. For a while, Lesnar stood as the ultimate obstacle, and then the company had to figure out how to pivot from Lesnar is unbeatable to creating new credible challengers who could eventually, believably, dethrone him. That's a different and messier creative problem to solve, one Vince accepted that night in New Orleans. Let's also be fair about the context that likely pushed McMahon's hand. The Undertaker was fighting time and real physical decline. Medical reality is an unforgiving arbiter of what can be planned for and what can't. If WWE believed WrestleMania X was their last reliable window to feature the Streak, with the dead man still able to perform at anything approaching his prior level, they had a choice. Lock in a mythical retirement or monetize the Streak before the body made that question moot. It's a pragmatic, almost accountant-like decision. When your most valuable intangible is at risk of losing function, convert some of that value now. That is cold, but in corporate terms often defensible. Even among the defenders of the decision, the most commonly offered counterpoint is this: Lesnar's win reintroduced existential dread into WWE's storytelling, a sensation the product had been struggling to create. The visual of the unbeatable monster pinning the man who had never lost at WrestleMania injected unpredictability into a business that often suffers from stale outcomes. That unpredictability, one could argue, paid dividends in heat, ticket sales, and headline moments that lasted months, not just a single night. The SummerSlam massacre of John Cena later that year served as the tangible evidence that the Streak's end had functional, strategic consequences beyond mere shock. But effectiveness and correctness are not the same thing. If the Streak's end was judged purely on immediate ratings and the creation of a fearsome new heel, one could make the case it worked. If judged by long-term creative architecture, handing a centuries-old myth to the next generation in a way that yields multi-year narratives and sustained top-card legitimacy, the judgment is harsher. Fans still argue whether the trade-off was worth it, and wrestling historians still catalog the moment as a turning point, not just for Undertaker and Lesnar, but for the company's temperament toward legacy versus spectacle. And then there's the human aftermath, the quieter, harder to measure fallout. Mark Calloway's interviews in the years since show a complicated mix of resignation, loyalty, and regret. He's publicly deferred to Vince's authority and framed his choice as part of his professional commitment, while also saying he wished the rub had benefited a rising star. Lesnar, for his part, used the win to shape a terrifying modern identity that the company leaned into. Heyman's promos made the victory into a forever scar, a promotional tool invoked for years. But the crowd reaction in New Orleans that stunned silence, the way cameras lingered on open mouths and empty chants, became the visual shorthand for an irretrievable loss. The spectacle was powerful, the sting lingered. What does the Streak's death teach us about wrestling's core tensions? It reveals the tension between myth and moment, between preservation and monetization, between what honors history and what sells headlines. It shows that one man's strategic vision can rewrite a cultural artifact instantly, and that cultural artifacts, unlike wrestlers, cannot be rebooked to restore their original value. Once a myth ends, you can create another, but you can never fully reconstitute the first one. That's the ache at the heart of the Lesnar-Taker debate. Was a second myth worth the erasure of the first? The answer depends on whether you measure success by immediate dominance or by sacramental preservation. The final, unavoidable point: this was never purely kayfabe. This was business, health, ego, and art all colliding in a way that left no clean answers. When the curtain fell, WWE had a new, darker king of the mountain. They had a headline that reverberated beyond the wrestling bubble. They also had a wound in their mythos that many fans will argue they never properly healed. The Streak's end remains both a masterstroke of modern spectacle and a case study in how corporate decisions can amputate cultural memory. That paradox is the reason the argument still rages. In the end, there's no comfortable resolution. If you believe wrestling's reason to exist is to shock, to create moments that we talk about for years, then the Streak's end was a calculated success. If you believe wrestling's duty is to protect and elevate its own myths, to craft graceful passings that hand the torch to successors, then WrestleMania X looks like a betrayal. Both perspectives can point to facts that support them. The Streak was real and sacrosanct. The decision was made late in the process by Vince McMahon. The Undertaker suffered a concussion and was hospitalized. Brock Lesnar's run afterward proved the corporate logic, and millions of fans still feel the loss, as if something sacred was taken. Those are the pillars of this debate, and they all stand on verified reporting and on the words of those who were there. So here's the uncomfortable truth you didn't know you needed. This wasn't an accident. It was decision-making at the intersection of commerce, charisma, and mortality. It was a conscious choice to convert a protected legend into a commercial instrument. That choice made a monster and left a wound. It rewrote history in a way that still divides the audience. And it set a precedent. In WWE, no myth is too sacred to be traded for the right moment. That's the legacy of the 6th of April 2014. That's why the streak matters beyond the number 21, because it taught the business that the thing fans hold most dear can be turned into the thing fans scream about tomorrow. The debate isn't over. It's just getting louder.